So David, I'm recording, and I just wanted to go a little bit back in time with you. First time I met you was in 2003 in your flat in Tel Aviv.
Lots of time.
Yeah, and I haven't actually been in your region since that, and I'm a totally novice when it comes to Israeli politics and the conflict. But I visited some places, and I got my to put it that way, I was kind of shocked what I saw some places, and I got a really interesting introduction through you and the other guys that I met. And I wanted to start because you were one of the founders of the Refuseniks movement, wasn't you?
Yes.
Can you just explain me a little bit about that?
Yeah, you said we have 15 minutes. Right? I think that the introduction will be longer than that. I'll try to I try to give some headlines, and then we can just zoom in. You can just ask questions. So in general, everybody in Israel, like most of the population are the Jewish population are going to the army when we are 18 for 3 years for like boys, and 2 years for men, and 2 years for women. And I was recruited. I volunteered to be an elite, a commando soldier, and then I became a commando officer. The reasons for going to the army in Israel, there are a few reasons. The first reason is the law. You have to do it. It's you go to jail if you don't, and then but you can probably sneak out. But most people from good families are going to the army. It's and then there's the whole Jewish history and tradition, the Jewish suffering and the Holocaust, and this is built into the like the Israeli Jewish culture, about all this Jewish suffering and the Holocaust, and that everybody is against us, and that everybody that criticizes Israel is probably anti-Semitic. Like we are not wrong. Our policy is a good policy. If we do any kind of damage, it's just because of security reasons. So that's the spirit that makes me, for example, go to the army, protect the Jewish survival, and all these ideas that I really believed in. I was like the prototype of the good Jewish Zionist boy that goes to the army and volunteer to everything. And
yeah, why wouldn't you?
It took me like what?
Why wouldn't you? I mean, the history says a lot, and you were right to do that.
Yeah, but as it said in the social networks about relationship, it's complicated. so like I'm joking, but this is a critical, crucial part of my life. But so it took me time to understand that it's much more complicated than that. So that it's not just about security. It's just about going to the army and being like this amazing elite soldier, going on commando missions all around the place in Lebanon and other places. It was like about 25 years ago, a little bit more. It took me time to understand the politics around this place, and that it's not just an army of people that have. It's not like the French army or like armies of countries or people with borders and a long history in the land. It took me a lot of time because you are brought up in a story. It's not easy to understand, to see it from the outside, and to understand that it is a story. It's not just it's not so easy, and I think it took me when I was in the regular service in the first 3 or 4 or 5 years in the army. I was very young. I was very, very dedicated. I was very good, like really, really appreciated in my unit, doing like lots of stuff that you see in action movies all around the place with all this vest and different weapons, working with the Air Force, and everything. It took me a lot of time to understand that I'm protecting a land where like today, we are about 14 million people. In Israel, we say from the river to the sea. Our borders are the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. And within this land that the Israeli government handle or govern, there are 14 million people. Half of them are not Jewish. They're Arabs, Palestinians. 2 millions of the other 7 that are not Jewish have some kind of an Israeli citizenship. It's not an equal citizenship, but let's say it's a 80% citizenship. There are like clauses that prevent them from being equal, but let's say that they are voting for the government and they have some kind of rights, 80%. Another 5 million living under military control in many ways, a very, very violent one, even cruel, for more than 50 years. Maybe 70. There's lots of stuff going on, and when I was a soldier in a part of special operations in Lebanon, it was very clear that this was like an enemy state, and I understood that we have to protect ourselves from it. And it was easy. It's like fighting an enemy state or an enemy country. It's easier. But when you understand that like half of the people in the Israeli democracy are not voting, and this is not going on for like 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. Like it's been 27 years from the Oslo process or also negotiation, and it was like more than 20 before that from the 67 war, and it's already 72 years from the establishment of Israel in 48. So it's an ongoing situation, and none of the Israelis are about to change it. So there are people that are somewhat want to change it, but it's not the majority of the Israeli Jewish people, the Jewish people in Israel. So this is the background. And after 10 years in service, 4 in regular service and another 6 in reserve duty, which means like being a civilians that serve for 40 or 50 days a year in the army. It's like it's a different type of a civilian. I decided to refuse being a part of fighting the Palestinians inside the Israeli borders. I'm not talking about Lebanon, or if we have a war with Egypt. We have a peace with Egypt for 43 years, since 77. So we decided to say no, and they started another long story, which you were a part of in a way.
I wanted to just cut in there, because when you decided, can you remember the day that you decided to just go against, you know, this must be such a hard choice to make, because then you just flip over to the other side in a way, and you go against the whole story that you told.
Yeah, so I to make it not very long, I will try to say 2 or 3 things about it. The first one is that it is a process. It's not there was a single point of time where I made the actual decision, but it was a process. Like about 2 years before that, there was certain events that made me start thinking about what's going on, and then it was like opening a curtain behind a different reality, like and see something that you shouldn't see. So I understand that something is going on, and I started reading, talking to many people, and it was like. It was a very interesting and very uneasy experience, because it's like if I want to give a metaphor, I would say that it's like you go to your brother, and someone in the street comes to you and say, you know, Martin is not your brother. So say, what? What? He is my brother, but like there are some thoughts, some ideas getting in your head, and you start moving around, asking questions, and see what's going on. And I started to read stuff that I wasn't aware of. I didn't know anything about the Palestinians in Israel, anything. It's like it's part of the education system in Israel. You don't know anything about them. It was years before Facebook and the internet was like at its start. There was an internet, there was like Google, etc., but not so many materials online. So it was a long and hard process. So this is maybe the first point, because it was a process. I think that it took me about 2 years that when I got the call-up, I think you can say a call-up to the Al-Aqsa Intifada in year 2000. In 2000, I understood that all my new understanding of the situation should become an action. You can't understand everything, and I understood the situation is horrible, and I'm a part of a system or a machine that is doing that is very cruel, and most people that are involved don't really understand it. So I understood in 2 years later, it was like almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, that I have to take action. So there was in the flowchart, there was 2 options. The first one is to sneak out, like people do it all the time. You find ways to pull yourself out. You say like you have like a medical condition, or maybe your work is shouldn't you can do it in parallel to serving 50 days in the army a year and all this other stuff. But I couldn't take this path, because this is not who I am. I'm a very dedicated guy to like if I believe in something, I should follow it with actions. So the way that I volunteered to the army and was a part of all the actions, and so that I'm protecting protecting Israel. I couldn't sneak out before I decided to refuse being a part of it. And when I decided to refuse being a part of it, I saw it as a patriotic mission. I thought that my country, my people are going in the wrong direction, and I wanted, as a soldier, as a commander, as an officer, I wasn't to be the first in line to fight, to say that like you are doing something horrible. I know that it's not easy to hear it. And this is like contradicts everything you think and contradicts everything I was thinking 2 years ago. But that's my position. So this is why I'm an officer. I need to not only to stop. I'm not stop and doing this for my own to save my soul. It's not a soul-saving action. It's trying to change everything, and it was there was a naive. Some kind of a naive approach for it, a very serious one, but also naive. I was really thinking that doing it publicly, bringing like hundreds of people to it, hundreds of combat soldiers and officers that will stay together and publish their names and ranks and everything in the newspaper will change people's minds. So it created some change, but of course the story is much bigger than.
Hold it 1 second there. Hello. I'm just saying goodbye to. So how did that change your life after you made that choice, and you officially made this letter, combatant letter also, and you got all of these other soldiers on board, and suddenly you went off official with that. And what changed? How did your life change after that?
So I think that the main change was I was a very private person before that. Like nobody knew my name. I was nobody waited for to hear anything I said before that. And it's more. I think it's more about the life experience than the actual change, because you are becoming immediately me in specific. I had like friends and colleagues and comrades inside this refusal movement that did it and then went back to their former lives. With me, it changed almost everything. It's I became involved in politics all the time. In politics, mostly around human rights and trying to find ways to change, to help. It's like I'm involved with it all the time. It's like keeping my mind busy. I became the chairman of B'Tselem. It's the biggest, maybe most influential Palestinian human rights organization in Israel. This is not easy.
I wanted to just hold it a little bit there, because how did people look upon you? Did you also see that people that have been like friends or neighbors, did they change their view on you after you chose that side?
Maybe not really, in a way. This is a really interesting question, because interesting to think about, because in a way, even though like at least 70% of my like relatives and friends don't agree with this political stand. They saw that it is very like that. It's like a very brave or very the fact that I'm doing something, that I sacrifice something, that I'm standing in a place that they don't dream of standing in. I think that this has created a lot of a lot of appreciation, or even it's. I'll give you an example. Back then I was working from. I make my living from high tech, from software companies. There's a big startup ecosystem in Israel, startup nation, etc. So I was like a year after that, I was like some kind of an R&D group manager. I managed like 10 people. And then like after a year since since the letter, the competent letter, I was sure that it might be the end of my career in high tech. And then one of my managers, the CEO of a company I worked in, called me to his office and said, you know, your manager is leaving, and there's a 100 people unit that they want you to manage. So I said, okay, great, I will do it. And then he said, he kept on talking and said, you know, I think that what you are doing politically is terrible. It's like really, really terrible. But I need guys like you to manage stuff here. So like you know when you choose something, you know how to operate. So maybe it's good to have you around.
Okay, so it actually helped.
Yeah, in a way. I'm not actually later on in my career. High tech is not like it's not like the gut feeling of what I want to do. It doesn't interest me so much, but it was very nice. Like if I was pursuing an IT, a really, really big IT career, he really helped me to go there. So
okay.
But a few years later, I said no to this big shot's career in high tech. So it was my second refusal, the personal one.
You also told me last time that you would do anything to defend the land of Israel, the state of Israel.
Yeah.
But dropping, I think you said something, dropping a ton bomb in Gaza won't bring peace to your country.
Yeah.
It's not a part of protecting your country.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah. You still think that?
Yeah, of course. It's much. It's not only it won't bring peace, or we're not talking peace, we're talking security actually, and this is creating the complete the complete opposite of that. And actually, just from a different angle or a different perspective, I can't really believe today that like we are people that as people suffered like the Holocaust, and our Jewish history, at least from a mythos perspective, is full of suffering. Like we're talking about even our holidays. The Jewish holidays are full of suffering. Yeah. Like we are in Hanukkah right now, and Hanukkah is about the Greeks that were occupying the land. We fought them, and they killed us all. And in the last minute, there was the lamp, the Chanukia, that we managed. The people of Israel managed to keep it to keep its lights on. Just before the Greeks killed us all. And then in Passover, it's the same. That was the Egyptian. And like almost every holiday is about, they try to kill us all. We have a Jewish, I don't know if you know it, but there's a Jewish joke that what is a Jewish holiday? It's a Jewish holiday is they try to kill us. They couldn't. Let's eat a lot of food. So that's how it works here. Yeah. But going back to your question, that's changing this mythos of good and bad or black and white fighting with the Palestinians that are a part of this land, whether we like it or not. We came to a land that they were in. There might be, it will take time and lots of will to change it, but bombing civilians anywhere will not change it. Will not change it. It will just keep it on. What I wanted to say that's coming from the Jewish background, the Jewish history, thinking that like for today, about almost 15 years, we are closing 2 million people in Gaza. It's the most intense and dense people in the world. And we are doing it. We are keeping its border closed from the air, the sea, the land. All of them, besides one gate to Egypt, are under Israeli protection. This is like pretty amazing that like 70 or 80 years after the, I'm not comparing it, but
no.
We have history. So one should learn from history, not because, of course, we are not doing what Nazi did to Jewish people. This is very, 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 very different. It's a different story, different people. But to think that we are involved in closing millions of people without human rights for decades, this is like some kind of a joke of history. It's a very, very, very bad joke. And we have to change it. So
the army, I guess your government and the army would say that after you build the security fence on the wall and tighten it in the security, you haven't had the amount of terrorist attacks on Israeli land that you used to see before.
Yeah, so this is very good, a very good question. Why? Because we are in the fake news part of history today. So when you come to Israel and stay with us, we'll make an experiment. We'll go to the wall, to the fence, to the security fence, and we'll start. This is like, you probably remember how it looks. It looks like two half circles of a fence. So we will start in the north and just follow it. So it's about 700 kilometers long.
That's a nice walk.
Yeah. we can take a car. It's okay. We can. So something that most people don't know, even Israelis that live near the fence, near the wall, is that 150 kilometers from it are not there. It's not there. Like you can just walk. You can just take a car or walk to the other side. Not only that, is that there are huge holes in the fence part of the wall. There's a wall and there is a fence. It's changing all the time. So there are places in the fence that they have like 15 meters hole in the fence. So you can easily do it. And the fact is that all this the terror we used to face like 20 or 25 years ago, we don't have it now. But it's not because of the fence. There are many reasons why we don't face it. But if I don't want to think about it, but if a terrorist bomber wanted to explode inside Israel, it could do it pretty easily. It's not there is a fence that closes you can just very, very easily do it. And if you was here, we can just go there. It's pretty amazing. Like you follow the fence, and then there isn't a fence anymore. So this is, if it wasn't said, it was very funny because it's like a prison where like you don't have one of the walls. So
it's not that secure like they say it is.
Yeah, we have some kind of security now, but not because of the fence. There are many political reasons that we are not facing the Israelis don't face terror. The Palestinians, however, facing many people. Israel kills many people all the time. All the time. It's like on a weekly basis. It's not like that, but
so,
they're...
So we're jumping now to current time, but that's good. And how is the situation in the border areas now on the checkpoints? Is there still, after Corona, after the war in the Syrian war, and kind of the scrutiny of the international press has moved from Israel-Palestinian issues and to other countries and other issues, and we don't hear so much about it anymore. And is the atrocity still going on? Is it hard for the daily life for Palestinians, still as hard a struggle like it used to be back when I was there? And
yeah, maybe it's worse. Maybe it's worse than it was back then. And of course, you are right about the focus. The focus is it moved on completely to other places in the world. And of course, the Trump administration support for the Israeli government helped it in the Syrian situation, and today all these new relationships with the Emirates and Bahrain,
and Morocco now.
And Morocco is like I see it as like bad joke of history. Like we sold the Saharan people for relationship with Morocco. Like the people that the Jewish people that occupies and closes Gaza are doing a deal with with Morocco under United States, like maybe last 45 days, I think, of Trump in office. That we sell together the Saharan people to get direct flights to Morocco. So
how was that taken in Israel by the left and the human rights people in Israel when they heard that deal that Trump made for you guys?
That's since you was there like I think 17 years ago or something, 17 or 18 years ago, almost 18 years ago, there was a huge change in the Israeli political map. In many ways, we can discuss it like for hours, but mainly all of it went the Jewish politics. Jewish are 80% of the Israeli population. 20% are Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. When you talk about the Jewish people, I think that there are 90% of them are center or right. And it means that even if the center might be left, some kind of left in the future, today, like actual left are about 5%, 5 to 7% of the Jewish population. This is like amazing. Like 17 years ago, you could see it as 45%, 48%, maybe 50% in a very, 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 in the Rabin days. If you were asking someone in the street, like, what's the percentage of the left, of the left in Israel, he would say like 40 to 52. Of course, it depends on who you ask. But today, it's actually it's like 5. If I want to be maybe 5 to 10.
So it's like the left the building somehow.
Yeah. It's the building, and this is. We can talk a lot about it. There's some of it was there to happen for many reasons, including the occupation. But today in Israel, like nobody cares or wants to know anything about the Palestinians. It's a non-issue. Like the political parties, when they go to the election, if 27, 25 years ago in the Rabin administration, that was like the number one priority political issue in Israel. Today, it's like, it's not a number. It's not number 10. It's not a number. Nobody cares about what's going on. Everybody assumes that it's here to stay. Nobody wants to talk about it anyway.
So the whole peace plan that Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, presented to the world with Netanyahu. I think it was in Washington. I was watching it, and it was it struck me that no Palestinian representative was in that press conference.
Yeah,
it was like they were not involved.
It was a joke. It's like the Palestinian leadership. It was a joke, and the funny. I shouldn't use the word funny because it's not funny, but the whole Trump character and what it says about the world politics, and you see like about 2 months they presented this plan. The Kushner and these guys themselves sold the plan to the Emirates for a bunch of F-35 airplanes, and they just closed it for the relationship with the Emirates. So this is the level that they took the plan to. So they worked about this fake plan for like a year or two, presented it in the last minute to help Netanyahu with his last elections, and then like a month after that, they just took it off the table. For some kind of a deal with a small country in like with the Emirates, which is a small oil state. This is all like small deals and American politics, not related to Israel in any way. So this is the Kushner plan.
Yeah, and the plan was also saying that this is the last chance for the Palestinians. You either accept it, and there will be no other plan after that.
Yeah,
is that almost like a declaration of war if they're not accepting it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that the Europeans, which like the European involvement in Israel, though it's not as intensive as it was like 20 years ago. But it was, I think that everybody in Israel and in Palestine knew that the Europeans, which are the most serious players, the international players, nobody takes Trump seriously. So I think that many stakeholders understood that it's not the last. Maybe it's not just the last chance of the Palestinians; it's the last chance of Trump. Like everybody knew that Trump should go home, okay? Even if it was pretty terrifying that he might stay. But I don't think, I think that the Trump's politics, as damaging as it was, I want to say it was, it's not over yet.
No.
But I think that everybody knew that this is some kind of a silly game or a problematic game, but nothing of it will last. So
I wanted to ask you, because how is the environment for the human rights work you're doing now? The pictures that we get out from the checkpoints and that we see is almost like 90% from your organization.
Yeah.
Is the army doing it hard for you? Do you have can you go to these areas without being checked thoroughly and harassed? And
so about 5 years ago, there was many Netanyahu governments. So they tried and they were successful in a way of trying to pushing out the human rights of organization. They were somewhat successful, but not completely. And today we are working well. So nobody is stopping us. If they try to stop us, we have workarounds, many workarounds in the field. Most of our field workers are Palestinians, and as you probably know as much as I do, all the filming instruments and the tools, etc., are becoming much more sophisticated, and you can use many ways of filming, talking to people from like we do now. Interviewing and our job, our work, our ongoing work is okay. I think that the problem we're facing is that the interest in Palestine is not as big as it was 10 and 20 years ago because of the shift in the world interest to other places. And actually, you can say the same about the Sahrawi people in Morocco, that the Palestinian people, in a way, maybe like the Kurdish people or like the minorities in many people in the world, they are very weak in compared to Israel. Israel is a small country, but when comparing to its size, it's very like we're like it's like we are like a small power, a small world power. Of course, you have the United States and Russia and China and India, etc. But after the first Big Ten, we are very up in this list.
Definitely, yeah.
For reason, the Palestinians on the other side are very weak. And for years, the Europeans kept their back in ways. In other ways, the Europeans supported the situation, and they supported it now because they can, in ways, they could easily stop it. Just putting some kind of taxes on Israeli export to Europe would change the situation in days. Because like I think that 40% of Israel is an exportation country. We can't live without exporting to other countries. We don't have a big internal economy, and most of it goes to Europe. So the European Union.
On that note, David, because we had these talks here used to have a talk about boycotts. And we had the academic boycott. Someone started to talk about that. And, I know people that won't buy oranges that come out of Israel. And what is your view on a boycott of Israeli goods?
I think that the question is not about boycott. I think that the question is about a plan to change the situation and then to take measures to implement the plan. So talking about boycott is talk about the penalty.
Yeah.
Talking about penalty is our plan. If there was a plan for a state, for an Israeli Palestine or the land between the river and the sea, for these 14 million people, a plan for equal rights, either in two states, in one state, in two states with a confederation, etc. And there was a European Union decision to push it hard, to push it to an end to the conflict and the human rights violation here. And together with the plans, they wanted to take measures to boycott or to do any kind of pressure against Israel. I am a supporter of it, but with a plan. I don't. That's why I don't like to talk about boycott or BDS, etc. Not because I don't think that you have to implement power. You should do it. I believe in it. I think that it's crucial. But you have to do it to implement a plan, not just
symbolic.
Not just symbolic, even if it's an effective plan. I think that you should say what you want and then take some measures to implement it. That's the way I look at it.
One of the biggest argument, kind of from the right side in Europe or in Norway and other countries, is that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. You know, look at this flag of freedom and equal rights.
Wait another 10 years.
Okay.
You just have to wait.
Yeah.
It's because just sorry for interrupting.
No. So you don't look upon it that way, because it's an island in the Middle East where you have, you know, oppression and you have dictatorships and you have cruel handling of their citizens and no rights for homosexuals and not freedom of religion in the same way.
I think that it's all values discussion is somewhat misleading. Why? Because what Israel is doing around this, we are violates 50% of our population rights on daily basis for decades. So if we are like the European and the American the democratic partners in the Middle East, okay, that's good. Let's keep it. Let's make it a real democracy, because this is not what I think that Israel is more. It's more like an economical partner, a startup nation partner, a Jewish partner, because not Jewish partner to the Christian world, because of the Jewish history in Europe. I think that it's more about this than about democracy, because I don't know how much. I don't think the Trump administration, for example, cares about democracy. I don't think that if Israel is moving towards an authoritarian regime for years. We are not there yet. We are far from there. But there's a process. We are in a process. This is very clear. We are in a huge populist move. So we are not Poland, and it will take us time to get there. But Netanyahu is like best friends with Orban, and Orban from Romania. And
how strange is that? How strange is that?
So this is strange as keeping 2 million people in Gaza and their the situation. So what I'm saying, what I'm answering to your question is that I think this is more about. This is like a good location on the a good point on the map for keeping good export import. Maybe keeping American weapons. That we are maybe better partners than Egypt, or maybe more stable place than the Jordanian than Jordan, with a king ruling 70% of its people that are Palestinians, for example. But I really don't think it's about values. That's what leader says. But I think it's like a good business partner.
So do you still believe that there's a chance for a one-state solution? I mean, idealistic. This question sounds probably naive, but idealistic. It's two really smart, clever people on both sides of the green line, both sides of the wall. And if you guys could work together, then probably they would be the best prosperous country in the world.
Yeah, I see. I don't think it's naive. I think there's lots of quotations for much bigger people than me. This is the situation in Israel-Palestine, since its beginning 100 years ago, is a complicated one. There are two people here on the same land. In 48, like most of the people most of the Palestinian people in Israel were taken out of this land. Many millions of people from Europe came in. This is a complicated situation. I think that the way I look at it is that we need to understand it. It's complicated. There are a few projects now of people that are trying to find solution to this many issues around here. I think that in a way, Rabin in 93 in the Oslo Agreement, there was, I'm not sure that it was naive, but I think that it will take some time. Hopefully not 50 years, much less than that, maybe more. I don't know. But what makes me optimistic is not that I think that like in 2 years that we will have two amazing leaders that will solve everything. What makes me optimistic is that I know that it is a tough process, and I think that the people on both sides, it will take them time, but we already see some indications that people on both sides understand that all of us are here forever. And I think that there are Israelis, you don't see it in the elections or in polls, that understand that it will not be stable, and then it will not be stable. The situation will not be relaxed or change inherently until we solve I feel there will be some kind of a mutual recognition that both people, even like the Jewish immigrants, are here to stay, and the Palestinians are here to stay, and we have to recognize what we did to the Palestinians in 48, and the Palestinians will have to recognize that the Jewish presence in this land is forever. It's not going to change, and start some kind of a process. It will take a lot of time. It was if 20 years ago I thought that if I would refuse and like show what I see to the eyes of the Jewish Israelis, they will understand and say, okay, we have to stop it. Now I understand that this is a tough process, but I believe that it will be successful in the end. Very, 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 very tough, maybe with blood, but I think it will be successful. I don't know why. But
that's good.
But I believe it. I believe that the people will understand that we are all belong to this land.
Yeah.
Maybe what we have to do to live here together is very, very tough, probably unacceptable to many of the people here. But I really believe that
at the same time, you have even more settlers moving in to the occupied areas, and they're opening up for more. And then last time I was in Ramallah, they told me that many of the settlers are Americans that have invested in flats and apartments on a mission to gain back their land, as they say.
Yeah.
And this still is going on in the background all the time.
Yeah, all the time. They keep building all the time in East Jerusalem, but all over the place. It's like, I think that since 2002 or 2003, it's like since the Oslo agreements, I think that the settlers' population has tripled itself, maybe more. Maybe more. We are talking today on 500,000 to 600,000 settlers, and it's getting bigger. The Palestinians suffering from it, from taking land and everything. It's terrible. It's really, really terrible.
So how is that debate inside Israel when it comes to the settlers?
No debate.
No debate? No, nothing at all?
No debate. Nobody talks about it. Even the most left parties, there isn't a conversation about it whatsoever. Nobody talks about it. There, like we had four elections in less than 18 months. And this is not something political parties talk about. This is like amazing.
So what's the top 3 points that they're talking about when you have elections? What's the main?
So actually it's very easy, because there is one political debate in Israel for like a few years. It's Netanyahu or not Netanyahu. This is it gets down to Netanyahu or not Netanyahu, which is very, very problematic for all the other issues. And mainly it emphasizes how much the Jewish debate is very close together. Like there are like Netanyahu's opponent, Lapid and Gantz. There are like two political figures, two political leaders. They say in the debates, they say, we are the real Likud, is Netanyahu's party. The name of Netanyahu's party is Likud. They say, we are the real Likud, like we are the origins of the Likud, of the governing party. So that's how close they are in terms of politics, in terms of policy. It's so they said it's corrupted. We have to have Netanyahu. Netanyahu is okay, but we don't want him to be personally corrupted. If he wasn't personally corrupted, his policy is okay. So this is this is the political debate in Israel today. It's very, very bad.
When you work with your Palestinian colleagues or your Palestinian friends in the organization and on the borders, how do they look upon the future when you talk with them? Are they optimistic when it comes to a one-state or a two-state solution?
They don't.
No, it's dark.
They don't. I think that they are living their lives, and I think that this is a good question to ask Palestinians. But I don't want to talk on their behalf, but I think if just from talking to many people, I think that the situation is so hopeless right now for them. They are trying to find ways. There are few
They're
different
surviving.
processes. Yeah, for surviving, to find ways to have better lives. There are in East Jerusalem, there are rules that enable, you know, that Israel holds East Jerusalem, and all the Palestinian people in East Jerusalem, they are not citizens. They are residents of Israel. They are residents of Jerusalem. So they can start. Every individual, Palestinian individual in East Jerusalem, can start a process to gain Israeli citizenship. And for years they didn't want it, because it was like cooperating with the occupation regime. But for the last 5 or 10 years, they start appealing for Israeli citizenship. Even if it's against their national beliefs, because they say, like, so in our lifetime it won't happen, so at least we'll get some kind of rights, of Israeli citizenship rights. So we'll see processes that shows that they don't believe in a solution in the near future.
When you look outside of Israel or to Europe, for example, do you think that we still should care? I mean, the interest from the West is kind of going down, I reckon, from Europe especially. The debate is not going on here at the same level that it did. We had the Oslo Agreement, of course. Norway always played a kind of a big role in peace process in the Oslo Agreement, of course. But now we don't. It's almost like the kind of populist side has won in a way, saying that, you know, they have to, you know, continue with the security measures that they do, and we have to understand that they do that and it kind of, the organization has lost the power that they had in a way.
Yeah.
Do you think that we should still have our eyes on Israel, on Palestine?
Yeah, of course, for sure. That's like in B'Tselem, and in the struggle to change the situation is composed of two, like it stands on two legs. The first one is trying to change the people minds in Israel and Palestine towards a solution. This is at least 50% of it, 50, 60, 70. But without some kind of an actual push from Europe, I don't hope to get it from China or from India, of course. So in ways, Europe should play a big role in what's going on here, and I think that Europe role is there are two roles. The first one is the actual role in pushing Israel and Palestine, and especially Israel, which is the powerful part to change, even to take measures. The second one is that I think that the United States, even though looks like much more powerful, I think that Biden administration will look at Europe much more than Trump administration, and if Europe is silent, it will be much easier for the Biden administration to be silent too. And everybody has problems. If you don't push for a change, it will be much easier for the Biden administration to keep silent if Europe will be silent as it is now. Not completely. We got some serious help when fighting here to prevent removal of Palestinian villages from the land. And Europe was very, 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 very instrumental and very helpful in preventing it. But of course, it was really, really appreciated by B'Tselem. There are like people in the West Bank that are living in their homes and going to their schools because of European support for the last 3 or 4 years.
That's good to hear.
People that I know, like the real people, it's not like stars. The people that I know that I'm visiting all the time, people that are my friends, and so this is great. We need more. Yeah. It's not enough.
Is it hard for your organization to get support, financial support, or do you manage?
We manage. We still manage, and we are doing pretty well. We don't do everything we want to do, and everything we think that there are always plenty of room for more support, but we are surviving. It's we are okay, and actually Norway for many years is a very, very close supporter of my organ, of B'Tselem and other organizations. This is very, very appreciated.
That's good to hear. So Norwegian tax money is going to a good cause.
Yes. So yeah, definitely. It's it is very. In NGOs like B'Tselem, that it's always we get lots of criticism from the countries. That's our life. That we are here because we are criticizing the government and get lots of fire from the government, and an ongoing support for years is very enable us to stay focused, to understand that we always have to fight and to seek for more resources, etc. But we have some very, very good friends for many years that keep some of it safe. This is really, really appreciated.
What's the status of the Courage to Refuse now? Is it still going on?
No. Okay. No, we've been around for about 10 years, and now the organization is closed, and 10 years ago, and we're always around supporting and helping people on in individual level,
but are there someone refusing on behalf of?
Yes. The army made a smart choice not to do anything with reserve soldiers and officers that refuse. So you just say whatever. There's a lot of bureaucracy in the army, so you can just negotiate, and then you can dismiss, and it's okay. If in a way, we owe Courage to Refuse owes the army some of his publicity, because the army fought it so badly that it created lots of publicity for us. If it was if it has a better PR consultant, you can just dismiss it, and it was much easier. We still have people that refuse to be recruited as young 18, but there is some publicity around it, but it's like a few people a year, and this is it's not so much.
So no prison sentences for refusing now.
No, not for reserve duties, not for reserve soldiers, but for the young guys, there are like about 10 people that are serving 6 months in jail every year. But this is a not a very big phenomenon in Israel.
So you have children, and what kind of what do you see by the next generation when it comes to the Palestinian cause, and is there an interest there? How is the younger people thinking about the occupation? And
a very good question. The education system in Israel is going with the Israeli politics is going to the right. And when people get conscripted, they go to the army to a situation which is very clear to them. So if I went to the army without knowing anything about killing Palestinians and about the situation today, everybody knows everything. Like everything is on the internet. The human rights organization are with there are like tons of content on the web, everything, anything, all day long. You can read it through. People are posting from the West. Soldiers are posting and tweeting for the best West Bank about anything. So when you get there, you already passed the knowledge
that you needed to experience back in the days.
Yeah. So and then you get there. So you know it, and you get there. So it means that the chances for you to say no are not so big, because like 20 years ago, thinking the situation, if you told me when we met in the room that I'm sitting in right now, 18 years ago, that like aircraft will kill hundreds of people or thousands of people in Gaza, I would say like you're nuts. You are like crazy. Like this is a crazy idea that an aircraft will bomb Gaza. It was like it's something none of us expected back then. We didn't think that we'll get to anything. Like I think that I saw back then. I saw just a few tanks going in Gaza. I saw it's like somebody lost his mind. About 2 or 3 tanks in whole Gaza. So
and then you had Operation Cast Lead and the bombing in 2009, was it? And the war.
It was, and then 2014, and there was in Cast Lead, it was like about 1,300 Palestinians, and then 2,200, including about 500 children in 2014. And what I'm trying to say, that people that are going to the army know that this is the situation. Like they are going to be a part of this situation. So in a way, I was going with my story in mind was that this is like some kind of a general security issue of the Jewish people, as I said in the beginning of our conversation. Today, maybe people think that we are in a never-ending war for security. But we have like hundreds of thousands of people living almost inside Palestinian villages. So you can protect it. You can protect it. It's not a situation for security. So you can either come to some kind of a solution and keep these people there and change the way this whole situation is constructed, or you can pull them off, withdraw from there, and put a real border, not a fence, so a real border without countries.
So you were one of the first, I remember, to say that Israel must talk with Hamas.
Yes.
And was there established any contact?
No, it's Israel is talking to Hamas all the time. It's funny. It talks through mediators all the time, through the Egyptians, for time through the Germans, but they don't talk officially. So when they want to end the wars in Gaza, they send negotiation people to Egypt, and they sit in different rooms, and the Egyptians move from one room to another. This is ridiculous. Actually, the Israeli government in ways supports Hamas to prevent Abu Mazen, to prevent Mahmoud Abbas for getting out to be successful in a way.
So they need them actually in a way.
They are very. The Israeli government and Hamas in many ways share many mutual interests. This is in the first glance it looks absurd, but it's not, because what serves the situation best for Hamas and from the Israeli government, and this is the shame that the Palestinian people are not don't fix it, is the separation between Gaza and the West Bank. This is really weakens the Palestinian people leadership, and Israel wants it this way. This is very beneficial for Israel, very beneficial, and very problematic for the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian struggle. And as long as it is kept this way, I don't think that we'll see a real change here. And this is like I'm saying it to you in a conversation. I'm not a Palestinian, and I don't want and don't like to talk as if I am, or talk on behalf of the Palestinians. But what I hear from many friends is that this separation before this separation is solved, nothing will move forward around there. And,
there's no connection between. There's no road between Gaza and the West Bank. There's no possibilities to travel. You won't grant any access.
No, you can't move from both sides. You have to get many like documents, and it's not happening. Even people with families, children, it's a nightmare. You just, it's like 15 kilometers distance in some places, but you don't move from one region to another.
Do you arrange protests and gatherings with your organization in Israel, in the streets, and do?
Yes, but it's yeah, but they are mostly small.
But you said the left now is 5%. How is the peace movement? It was really strong back in the days.
Yeah, it's not existing. Not existing. That's and like if you publish, like put on a Facebook page and something on Twitter and push it strongly, like with money and people and like maybe famous people which have some position, which is some kind of leaders in Twitter, and put it on newspaper, printed newspaper, you get nothing. Like if you say, come protest for peace, you'll get 500 people. That's in a good day.
But you still still have left angled media like Haaretz and other newspapers that will front your cause.
Yes. So you can write the art is still okay. It has its own processes, but overall you can write whatever you want in Haaretz. There is an interesting. We have some kind of an online, a new online newspaper for the last 5 or 10 years, which are very good and present the human rights, peace, the Israel human rights and Palestinian people very well, very effective platforms. But they are not as big as the Haaretz or Yediot Aharonot. It's the bigger newspaper. But they are very good. It calls, by the way, the name is plus 972, which is the Israeli extension, the Israeli telephone. So this is the name. It is a it's a very good news media for the Israeli Palestinian region.
Okay, David. So we talked for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And I mean, somehow it's like, I visited your country 2 times. In 88, I think. I was there as a kid. And my father is German, as you know, and he was born in Berlin in 46. And he grew up, of course, with a guilt for what his parents' generation had done, the most horrific thing that has ever been done in Earth's history. And he always was a big friend of Israel. And I remember going to Israel with him, and I was looking around, and he was saying that, telling all of the stories that Tel Aviv was a swamp before the Israelis came and built this beautiful city. And we went around, and when we went to Ramallah, he was kind of reluctant to see. Also, on the checkpoints, he was talking with the soldiers, but when we were in Gaza, and he was himself put on gunpoint at one of the checkpoints, and we went out to the border areas, and there were some kids playing ping pong in a bombed out house there, and in Han Yunis. And we came out after that, and he was kind of like, he didn't say much for many hours. He was quite in a shock that, this country that he has supported in his thoughts and actions for so many years could do things. So he started to, we had a lot of debates, So the conflict, it's not only making problems in the country itself, it's also spreading out around the world, because I think now Christmas is coming up, and we're singing about Bethlehem, and we still have this idea about Israel as the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and I think everyone feels that they own a little part of it.
Yeah.
And it's hard for many people to see and to agree with that there's being wrong is being done towards the people.
I would really love to see a way for this all people to find a way to come together and to push it to a different place. It doesn't have to be that way. That's of course there are many obstacles towards a different situation. But there should be a different situation.
It definitely, and I remember talking with students at the Birzeit University, and many of them also had this thought that during the Oslo Agreement, they remembered that they could travel a lot more, and there were some hopes, and they could go to the beach in Haifa, and they could go out, and when they start to talk about that, you can see the sparks in their eyes that, that's the way it should be. And it's not, I'm not saying it's not hard to make it, but it's still a chance there.
Yeah, I think that what I said earlier, it's that I think that some optimism can arise from the fact that you understand that you know what's the goal, and you understand it's very tough. It's very tough, but you want to be involved in changing it. Because people that think that it will be like a walk on the beach, it won't be. It's going to be tough. But we have to go there, because there should be a different future for the place. By the way, what you said about people in Bethlehem wanting to go to the beach reminds me of something that is happening now. This is very surprising. We talked earlier about the new relationship with the Emirates. The Israeli relationship with the Emirates. So thousands, or maybe tens of thousands of Israelis are already flying to Emirates to travel, to party, to whatever. This is pretty amazing, and it's happening during the Corona, the COVID-19 days. So why I'm saying it? Because that I think that there is some kind of, for the Jewish people in Israel, probably maybe more for the Mizrahic people. You know what's the Ashkenazic and Mizrahic in Israel?
Yes.
There's some kind of a passion.
The Orthodox, or the more...
No. There are Orthodox and secular, and Orthodox and Haredic.
Yeah.
But that's for the next conversation. What I'm trying to say, that I think that even for the Israeli Jewish people, there is some kind of a really big passion to meet Arabs that they are not afraid of. So that's why they are going to the Emirates now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I first think about it just now when you said it about the Bethlehem Palestinians that wants to go to the sea. I didn't understand why like Israelis can go to Istanbul and go to Egypt and they go to Europe. They couldn't understand why this new relationship with, like the Emirates are not they're a very close friend of the United States, and they are not a democracy. And Saudi Arabia is not a democracy. So this is back to our earlier point about Israel. I think that
hypocrisy.
Of course. So that's what I'm saying, that Israel, the Saudi Arabia is maybe the closest partner of the United States, and they are not only they are not democracy, they are a very cruel dictatorship. Yeah, so this never prevented the United States to to partner with anyone. So I'm just saying that when I saw the Israel almost craving to go in thousands to the Emirates, like it is like 2 months after the relationship were presented, I feel that there is some kind of a desire to party to meet Arabs. Like if there is like a magical solution that will enable people, Israelis from Tel Aviv, to go to Nablus and just party there, just eat and be there, and not afraid of not afraid of Palestinians. I think that there is something
yeah, I see.
ecological. We want to go there, but we're afraid, and there is no solution right now. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, I guess that's
take some of it.
I guess that's the first step you need, is that you can see that, we can hang out together without, people being, but there's a rage, I guess, and also anger for the occupation. And I, talked also with Palestinians that, they don't want Israel there at all. And the old idea of pushing Israel into the sea is still there, of course. But I mean, the majority probably is willing to accept the Jewish people in Israel and the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
If
yeah.
I don't know if there's some statistics on that, but
there are polls. There are very there are polls. There's Mustafa Barghouti that is doing polls like for years, very accurate polls, and they say I don't think that there's most Palestinians and most Israelis understand that we are here, we are stuck here.
Yeah, and I also read once that the genetics is really similar between the Palestinian and the Israeli people. That you're more of the same in a way.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if we'll understand in like in 100 or 200 years that the real Jewish people. The real historical Jewish people are the Palestinians. It's like nobody knows. It's like I remember that when we visited you about 2 years ago, maybe a bit. You mentioned the genetical test that you took.
Yes.
And you find out that only your mother is a pure Norwegian.
Yeah, she was 100% Scandinavian. Yeah. And my brother actually had he had some Ashkenazi.
Okay.
Yeah, 8%, I think.
I can't understand how come. Like you don't have to have the same genetics as your sister and brother.
No, because you get 49% from your father and 49% from your mother.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily the same amount. So if my father I can get some other genes from my father than my brother will get.
Okay.
That's the part. I'll get the other 50%.
2%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, or like we have this interesting actually with my father's background, but my father didn't score on the Ashkenazi part. And my mother being 100% Scandinavian, then it's strange that my brother got. But I think.
By the way, this test, it's like this is like a DNA test that shows that you're sure that all of you are the biological.
Yeah, that was the first. I matched up with my. That was. But I actually got 2% Nigerian. Nigerian. So I asked, I got a neighbor, he's a smart guy at genetics, a PhD in mathematics, and he said that that's statistical error or statistical noise, he said.
Okay.
So it's not, but we have a huge amount from the Middle East actually, from my father's side.
Okay.
So maybe that's why he's always longing back to the bar in Tel Aviv.
Yeah. you have to come back.
Yeah, it was.
I have a friend in Oslo. His name is Oystein. Oystein. I'm not sure that I don't think that your father knows the name. He is a journalist,
Okay.
and his name is Oystein Windstad, I think.
Okay. Is it which paper? Is it a newspaper or?
Yeah, it's a newspaper that belongs to one of the how do you say, workers unions.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I will ask him the name. And 2 years ago, we stayed in a house they have in the mountains.
Oh, nice.
And then we met you and met him in Oslo. And since then, I think about Oslo and about Norway like I tell you, like three times a week, all the time. I want to go to Oslo.
We have this big there was an author who just gave out a book about anti-Semitism in Norway during the war.
Okay.
And the resistance movement, you know, and she had tracked down and found out some information that the resistance movement also had some anti-Semitism in it. And a lot of stories popped up of how you know, Norwegian Jews were treated really bad, and because and then I started to read more about how the anti-Semitism was really a part of the society before the war, and that it was not only like one guy from Germany that could manage to start all of this. The kind of the ground was already tilted or made for anti-Semitism. And I know that this is the first time we really had a really thoroughly debate about that in Norway after the war, that it was such a big part of the society. So I think also when it comes to, we have to, you know, separate those two things, that we can talk about human rights violations on the border areas in the occupied territories without thinking anti-Semitism, because that card is being drawn a lot of times when you talk about Israel. It's, you know, I think a lot of people is kind of stepping back from the debate because they don't want to be looked upon. And we do have anti-Semitism still, you know. You don't have to dig really deep before old views, established views on Jews from back in the days. It's not that deep under, and it's kind of, it scares me sometimes when I hear people just saying that, you know, all stereotypical views on Jews, they're still fluctuating, you know, that there's this big Jewish establishment trying to fool the world, and all of these things. So you have to maneuver in this environment when you're talking about.
Of course, it does. It's not helping, and by the way, the Israeli government, at least for the last 10 years, is like doing a really professional work with anti-Semitism around the world. Like every kind of criticism goes to anti-Semitism, and this is like they are professionals on working on using Of course, you have to fight anti-Semitism badly, but they are using it very well for their policy. It's every time people criticize Israel, it goes immediately to anti-Semitic voice, and that everybody that is criticizing the Israelis policies is actually an anti-Semite. So this is complicated.
That's not really helping the cause, because that's making it a lot worse. And that's also when you see Netanyahu and Trump and those guys together, you know, in that press conference talking about the peace plan. I think that's also kind of pushing more, you know, gasoline to the bonfire, you know, on the views, and so these guys are not helping the cause at all.
Yeah, Trump himself is a true anti-Semite. He's and people in Israel, when you say it, there were a lot of articles about it in the American news, in the American medias, and when you say it or send someone an article like this in Israel, he immediately say, how do you say it? His daughter is married to a Jewish guy.
Yeah.
So this is always the excuse for this. Of course, it's not. It doesn't hate only Jews. It goes to immigrants, black people, everything that is not white American.
And you just had the big rescue operation of the Ethiopian Jews now. I read.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't know about it.
Okay,
I don't think there were. I heard something about it, but I didn't know that it was it happened. Okay, I heard that there was some kind of a debate, but did it actually happen?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I saw something that a flight was brought out with some of the refugees that had been in a camp for many years in Ethiopia. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, No, check it out. It's interesting. Because there's another situation. There's the Jewish immigration to Israel is really something for like many PhD theses, because like you know that in the early 90s Israel brought about 1 million Jewish people from Russia.
With Lieberman came.
What? Yes.
Was it then?
No. He came a bit earlier. He came in the 70s.
Yeah.
But and this of course changed Israeli politics very much, because most of them are right-wing people. But what's interesting about it, it's that out of this million, of about 1 million Jews, about 500 weren't really Jews in any way. They wanted to come here because of improving their lives, etc. But they weren't Jews according to any kind of test.
Yeah.
Okay, but when it comes to Ethiopians, that most of them are really living a religious life. They like wearing kippah, the yarmulkes and kippahs, and praying and going to the synagogue, etc. But they are black. They are just a few thousand. They are not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Israel is keeping them in camps for like years. And this is amazing. It's like they brought like 500,000 people without any kind of Jewish background.
That must have been really a hard blow for Palestinians to watch.
Yeah. Exactly. And this is another part of the complexity of this place, of this huge immigration. This is like a very big conversation, because until there is some kind of change in the situation here, it will be. This is what you said. It's like how do you say it? Like stinging or no?
Yeah, like a sting, or
like it's touching a very big point.
Yeah.
In this of course with all this all the not immigrants. Well, how do you say? I lost like all the people that come, the people that come to Israel from Africa, running away.
Immigrants.
Yes, immigrants, but like people that run away from
refugees.
Refugees, like with the refugees. Israel does not check for is not checking for refugees background in any way. They don't accept any refugees to Israel. Why? Some of it is because that if we start to accept refugees from Africa, we might be called to accept Palestinian refugees. So this
Yeah.
is a long conversation.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very interesting, and sometimes it feels also like we're dipping into it from a peaceful country that I'm in, and I feel also that I how to put it, I don't really have the right to dig too much in it in a way.
Please do.
Thank you. I have a Palestinian friend here in Oslo. He's a doctor, and he they had to flee to Kuwait, and then he studied in Hungary, and he learned Hungarian, which is a really hard language. Became a doctor, and he came to Norway and started to practice here. And when I talk about Israel Palestine with him, he say, "Please don't. It's like someone sticks a knife in you, and you start twisted around." That's how he feels every time, because it's so hurtful.
Of course, and this is like you know, like a story. If this guy would write a book, and it will be about forcing about he was forced to go to run away, or to go from Palestine to Kuwait, and then to Hungary, and then to Norway. And people in Israel don't know anything about people. Like they know that there was a war in 48, and then there was a Jewish majority. They don't know what happened to the people that were there before. They don't know that they were existing. They don't know anything about it. Or hearing a story about someone, it's really, really interesting. Maybe I should find a way to see if there are probably books about it, of people that wrote their how do you say it? Like how they
memoirs, or
yes, memoirs about forcing about their life, running away from or forcing to for the forced removal of this land to Kuwait, then to maybe to other to Syria, then to Europe, then to and to that these are people. Some of them are my age or my parents' age, and like we would. In another world, we would just neighbors. So the politics changed it all. So this is really interesting.
It is, and it also always ends up with like a people that experience so much atrocities and so much pain, like the Jewish people, that can be able in a state to press down and do violations like you see. It's hard for people to accept or understand. But isn't that what they say? But when you've been hurt, you can hurt others.
Yeah. The truth is that we think of human beings as a very complicated, smart animals, but in many ways we are not so complicated. We are not so complicated. No, we are very simple. React to very simple, straightforward feelings, aggressions. We fear, we are afraid, so we attack. It's not so like you would expect that. I expect it. I think that like 80% of what I'm doing is to prevent us, like my people, to have better lesson from our history, from what we see here. But people are living their lives. They don't care about history. Most of them don't know anything about the Jewish history. I'm not talking about the Palestinian history. They just don't care. And we have many institutes in Israel that shows you that the only lesson from the Jewish history is just being strong and fight back. It gets down to that. That's the whole story. The whole story ends up in the education system. you learn year after year about the Holocaust, and the lesson you learn is not to help your refugees, and there is no connection whatsoever to what's happening here in Israel, not a connection to refugees, to your human rights, to international law, nothing. We don't talk about it. We just talk about they killed us. We have to secure ourselves. End of story.
But it's understandable also, seen from outside, that the grand vision will be that we need security after all of those horrific things that happened, after being beaten for so many generations, and then now we got our state and we have to defend it.
Of course, that's the only problem, is that we did it. The state we established. There are other people in the state, and they are not the ones put us through all these atrocities. So it's not like
no, they got the blame.
Let's say that Ben Gurion started a country and this new state in Munich.
Yeah.
So, first of all, it wouldn't happen because the Germans are not the Palestinians. It would take 2 minutes until they send everyone that is still alive in somewhere else. But by the way, even the French. Like people are saying in political conversation in Israel, that the Middle East, it's not an easy region to live in. So I always say, I almost wait for this statement to be said. I always say that I think that if it would Israel would end up in a better region, like in a good, nice place between France and Germany, both states, France and Germany, would just live happily with this small region that was taken from both, because history shows that they just love other countries taking regions, just small regions. So I said, maybe it's not maybe the region is so not as bad as we want to think of it. Maybe it's better to fight with Jordan and Syria than with France and Germany.
Okay,
maybe.
yeah.
Just maybe.
Do you think that the Germans are getting away too easily?
What?
Do you think Germany is getting away too easily? That they should have helped out more? They have a big part in this.
Yeah, I think that they should play bigger role here, but I think that maybe their complexity is bigger than you talked about the anti-Semitism problem of when it comes into this whole debate, and in Germany it's probably I don't think Germany it's very, I think it's very complicated for them. The problem is that they are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So, they could make a change or help making a change, but
they should.
But again, the history doesn't help you.
No. Okay, David. I'm not going to take more of your time. What are you doing tonight?
It's 11 here. What's the time? Is it 9?
10.
It's 10. Okay. So we'll probably have some beer and go to sleep.
Is the bars open or no?
No. All closed. There are places that like you can take and sit in the street or in tables in the street, but mostly very, very close. Like this is a very busy place in Friday nights, and it's like.
So who do you think? Who should I call the next?
Good question. From Israel?
Yeah, maybe from Palestine then. From the other side.
Yeah. Let me think about it. I would probably be able to come with a few names, a few interesting questions.
Maybe,
A few interesting people.
maybe I should call Kushner.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great to talk with you.
Yeah. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'll pick
By
up
the way, your father is answering his cell phone?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you send him? Can you send me tomorrow or now this number again in WhatsApp or in mail?
Yeah, I'll send in mail.
Just to make sure that that I have the right number.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Good, and I'll try to think of Palestinians that
Perfect.
to talk.
So you're going to holidays for Emirates next time or Morocco?
Yeah, definitely. I need to see another dictatorship closely.
Yeah. So you have so many TV series coming out of Israel now.
Yes, lots of them. Yeah.
I think maybe that's the most influential part we have from that region now is Fauda.
Okay, yeah. Fauda is not a for my cause. It's not a good. It's not a good service.
It's not good.
No, it's you know it's a TV show, but still, it's like an action movie with no good guys, bad guys. You don't see the situation as it's like we are all people, we are all human beings, and they kill us, we kill you. It's like an equal level of everything. Everybody is. By the way, did you see the HBO series Our Boys from Israel?
No, it's not in Norway yet, but it's coming now. It was just in the newspaper.
This is really good, really good. It's about it. It's touched me deeply because I know the places, I know everything about it. It's like if you see it. Like I know his house, the supermarket. I just know these places very closely, and it was like shocking to see it in the movie. And they are very good. The players, the actors, actors and actresses are very good. It's a really good show.
I'll check it out. Yeah. Did you see The Spy?
No.
With the Sacha Baron Cohen.
No, I didn't. I right now.
The guy who made Borat and he made a spy agent short series, really good. But it's strange that you haven't heard about it. It's about one of the most famous Israeli agents that went to Syria.
I heard about it. I just didn't translate it well. I saw it. It's good. Yeah, it's good.
It's good, yeah.
His grandmother is living just 20 kilometers from here. So
of the spy or Sasha's?
No, of Sacha Baron Cohen.
Oh, his grandmother.
Yeah, she came from, I think, from Russia to Israel, or from I'm not sure where is from. So she's living in Bat Yam. It's a city southern to Tel Aviv. So.
I think he's really good, and I think he probably have some supportive ideas for your cause.
Maybe. It's not a few things.
Yeah, he could be a good supporter. People listen to him around the world.
Once a year, we are sending a blast of a mail from one of our famous supporters. So we had a few of them. If he would do it, it will be amazing. Like we'll get tons of money.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, should we end it on that note?
Yes, and let's keep in touch.
And I'll send you. I'll show it to you before I post anything.
Sure,
on YouTube.
No problem.
Yeah.
Good. And send My warmest regards to your mother and father and sister and brother. And I'll talk to your father tomorrow or on Sunday.
Perfect. And you to your family too.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah and good Friday evening in Tel Aviv.
Happy Christmas in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't bought any gifts. We don't have snow either.
You don't have snow?
No, it's raining all the time. It's climate change.
I will postpone my visit.
Yeah. Yes. Come in February. It's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Rabbi.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
David.
Bye. Bye.